So in Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialist play, No Exit, people are led into a room one by one that they know is hell because they've died and they know that they've committed sins.
They don't know it's hell when they get there.
Well, they figure it out pretty soon, though.
They know they deserve to be in hell.
Yeah, so that's fair. They show up what they think is actually a waiting room, right? Because it's kind of fancy, like this. It's decorated really well, and there's comfortable couches, and one by one they show up, and they ask the valet who's bringing them in, like, well, when do we get to hell? How long do we have to wait here? Because they'd been expecting like medieval torture devices to torture them.
Because hell's been described to them this way.
You know, they were told during their time on Earth that hell would be torture at all times. But they can't find it. They just find this fairly comfortable sitting room. And it turns out that this is hell. They just didn't realize it yet. And that they were put there to torture each other.
Because hell is other people.
So a disclaimer before we go on anymore. Not only is hell not what you've been told, heaven isn't either. And that's mostly because the people who are telling you what heaven is are people like me and Andrew. People who stand up on the stage and tell you, here's how you should do things.
People who write books and give conference talks.
Maybe ignore that, right? Maybe you shouldn't listen to anything either one of us are about to tell you.
Or ever told you.
So hey everyone, my name is Alex Hidalgo. I'm the Principal Reliability Advocate at Noble 9.
I'm Andrew Clay Shafer, and I think and I know things. I'm a socio-technical systems hacker.
So the first thing that I want to tell everyone here at SREcon is that, I'm sorry, but SRE's dead.
I read it on the news stack. There was a straw man thing that just all you do in your SRE is monitor things. That's it. Mm-hmm. Isn't that it?
Yeah, I mean, that's been most of my career is monitoring things and responding to it.
And then DevOps, that just means that if you build it, you run it. That's what that means.
Yeah, you also got to ship it many, many, many times a day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Accelerate it. So I like to celebrate the annual death of DevOps for the last almost 10 years. It's pretty nice.
And there's two
Feels
different
good.
times that SRE may have died. It's either when the book was published.
I'm pretty sure it died yesterday. If you're
Yeah, I guess it keeps going. Like, we're not really sure exactly when it expired, but it's definitely not around anymore.
So I'm going to start with a little bit of my story. I'm not going to tell the whole story, but there's other people in this room that were kind of seeing some of this. So once upon a time, I was a software developer at some venture-funded startups you've probably never heard of, so I won't tell you about them. And then, dun, 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 I invented DevOps. Actually, I didn't invent DevOps. I stole it. And I stole it from my friends in this very building. So this is advice for everyone. Good DevOps copy, great DevOps steal. And in this building in 2009, there's a talk given by John Allspaw and Paul Hammond, and they are talking about Dev and Ops cooperation at Flickr. So 2009, Dev and Ops. And I happen to be sitting in the audience, live tweeting, as one does. And I put something like this. I put a bunch more. And this is, if you want to go find these, it's, I think, June 23rd, 2009. There's a bunch more. And I was tagging them DevOps. And at the time, my friend was following me. And we'd already been planning to have a conference. At the time, we had been talking about agile infrastructure, which we'll come back in a second too. And we had met, and we were already conspiring, and we're going to do this thing. And the next day, he's like, we're going to call it DevOps Days. And dun, 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 things happen. So that was in 2009, but I think it's worth kind of framing the context about what was happening, what was in the zeitgeist, in the water, if you will. And this is the fuller context of this very famous, misquoted, you build it, you run it. So he's talking about this feedback loop specifically where developers are getting contact with the operation of their software. And we'll come back to that probably a few times in different ways. So that's 2006. This is something that also impacted my thoughts a lot at the time, and this was the person or one of the people that founded the Velocity Conference. And at the time he wrote this, he worked for Amazon, and he was talking about, he goes on to be a founder of Chef, and he does some interesting things after that as well. But at the time, he's making the argument that operations is the secret sauce of startups. And I would make the argument, and I do make this argument constantly, that operations is the defining advantage of the true cloud native companies, that they have this operational advantage. And this is 2007, so I think these numbers can be even more impressive now. But you can kind of think of the color in the graph as basically the toil. So in the better secret sauce version, you have less toil. And then I was giving talks in 2008 under the banner of Agile Infrastructure that looked like this all the time about the wall of confusion between dev and ops. And I contributed to this book from O'Reilly called Web Operations. I wrote a chapter called Agile Infrastructure that I think held up pretty well. So just for the sake of having that context, there's these 3 years in the middle between cloud being started, the first launch of Amazon Web Services, and then DevOps. And then this is my definition of DevOps. So sometimes people talk about how DevOps doesn't have definitions, and I think that's silly, because if you're ever in a room with me, I will give you very prescriptive answers for everything you should do. I just don't think everyone should have the same exact prescription. So this is about optimizing the human experience and performance of operating software and with humans. And it was never about devs doing ops. It was about software helping solve ops problems. And put devs on call is a good idea because it's not to wake them up, it's to make sure that someone rarely has to wake up. And with that, there's this other story.
So my journey went a little bit different. I was a system administrator for a long time. My first job was in 2001, the Department of Energy, all sorts of regulations, but really what I did on a day-to-day basis was take care of Linux servers. We had a whole bunch of Linux servers. We needed them to work well, it was a platform, if you will. And the way we did this is we did things like we wrote scripts and we automated things, we automated our deploys, right? We wanted to lower the amount of work that we had to do on a day-to-day basis in a manual sense. And that was way back in 2001. But then Google showed up, and Google said, there must be a better way. We need to not only script things and automate them, we need to script and automate them at scale. So we better give this a different name. So this is Ben Trainer-Schloss. This is a famous quote, SRE is what happens when you ask software engineers to design an operations team. And so what this did was it helped people, do SRE, which was so much more than just sysadmin think. So they decided that, a book should be written, and I helped with little bits of this, and then they were like, oh, we sold so many copies of this book, y'all, so we better write a second one. Not because we want to help people, but because the first book is really popular. So I helped write, some of this book. And I joined Google back in 2011, and I was given the title of SRE. I didn't totally understand what that even meant at first, because my previous title was Technical Operations Engineer. But I was so excited, and I was learning so much, and I was like, I love being a site reliability engineer. It became part of my identity. It really did. There was, for a very long time, I thought I was never going to leave Google. I was going to be an SRE forever, because it's what I was meant to do. And to explain this excitement about SRE, I really want to take you through the 5 stages of site reliability engineering. So the first is denial. No, this isn't just ops. No, this is something special, right? Like, this is something unique. We only do it here at Google. It's not operations. No, 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 no. This is something different. I absolutely swear it. And then you get to anger when you realize, but this is just the same stuff I've been doing. What is the special? What is the different? What makes SRE not just system administration? So I'm like, okay, but maybe it's just I'm not on the right team, right? Maybe my team is very sysadmin, but if I move to this other team, I'll get to learn so much more, and I'll truly understand what site reliability engineering means. And so I move teams, and I move teams, and I move teams, and I don't, oh God, this is really just operations, isn't it?
But better.
But it pays you better.
Yeah, boy.
And then finally, you come to accept, right? That's the final stage of SRE. You realize, okay, there's a fancy title. And at Google, you do have better tools available to you, which makes it maybe a little bit different. But that's just because it's a larger company with more software engineers and more SREs to write code for each other, to write tools for each other. But at the end of the day, you're still just trying to keep shit running, which is all I ever did when I was a sysadmin or a technical operations engineer or anything in between. And so I hit an existential crisis. Just this last fall at SREcon23, I gave a talk where I literally said, I don't know what SRE is anymore. I don't know what it is.
Now you're the same as DevOps, I think. That's how it works.
Yeah.
Because that's a complaint.
And it turns out I'm not the only one. Right? 2.5 years ago, Niall Murphy ripped the SRE book in half. He was the primary instigator of it. And even he said, look, maybe this was a mistake. Maybe we never should have written this and put it out into the world and expect people to just do this thing. Because, well, everything's different. Everyone's platform is different. The problems people are trying to solve is always going to be different.
Do you think that could be called a sin? So in the play, the people all know that they did these things in their real life, that they deserve what they're getting. And I already mentioned the sin that people don't think DevOps was well enough to find, but there's also, along the way, some other murders, or some other things got killed along the way.
Which it should be noted that was written by a VP or director at the time, director of SRE at Google.
Yeah, that one's from 2014. The other one's from 2012. But I think if you go back in the annual death of something, the sysadmin stuff's been dying for a long time.
Lisa, I'm sorry, but you know, at one point in time we had a wonderful conference called Lisa. Yeah. And then eventually we got SREcon, where we are today, where we've gotten to experience many great talks, learned a lot of things, meet great people. This is great. But eventually, did SREcon murder Lisa?
We don't know.
Yeah, we're not sure yet. We haven't found the body.
Might be old age. So this is from the book, this theme about the existence of this knife that has really no use in the context that they're in. And this is something that is a theme throughout a lot of the existential stuff, is that existence precedes essence. And I'm going to assert and argue and hopefully make some points about that platforms exist because something was needed to build, run, and manage services, and that they exist because of that necessity, right? And so let's tell a little story. All the words. Is anyone trying to do this right now? I will. If you've tried to do this without a platform, your life is literally hell right now. Because if you're like, let's just do the math. We're going to deploy more often, and we're going to deploy more things, and we didn't solve this problem. That sounds like hell. So there's this other thing called NIST. I don't know if anyone's ever checked that out. They write stuff. So they came up with this thing in 2011, 5 years after the EC2 thing started, and they made these characteristics lists and this models list, service models list. So I think at the time, one thing to note is self-service. That's going to come back in a minute too. But the service models of software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, when that was first published in 2011, I think platform as a service was probably the least defined. And as a consequence, it probably led to a bunch of these other things, and we could blame Heroku and like whatever. But this is the other quote, right? You build it, you run it, probably. When Werner Vogel said that at Amazon in the year 2006, Werner Vogel did not mean two pizza teams were going to go like build their kernels and like bring up their networks and like provision their databases and like do all this stuff. He's talking about something that already had APIs to do most of what that platform looks like internally. So he's not talking about you build it, you run it, meaning all the rest of those layers. That exists. That's already API-driven problem solved for them. And what I want people to think about is that each of these layers, the 3-layer cake from this, each of those is its own little software value stream, right? So all the things you can think about software development apply to the infrastructure development, platform development, software development, but that does not get you out of the necessity of operations, that all those things now need to be operated. And you can have different models based on your org charts and what you're going to build and buy, about what you're going to own and operate, and those can be very strategic and advantageous, but they don't go away. Someone still does that. So if you are using a cloud provider, maybe you don't have to do the bottom layer, but no one out of the box right now provides a fit-for-purpose platform that you're going to need to do some work.
And it's kind of weird to me that so many people ignore this. Right? Well, sure, people started talking about platform engineering just a few months ago. I think it's mostly marketing anyway. We needed a new term, but because it's
we need a new budget to get a new silo.
Yeah. Because it's all throughout the SRE book, most explicitly in Automation at Google and the evolving SRE engagement model chapters. But the point is, it was talked about a lot. You need a platform. You need a platform, and people just seem to ignore that part of it. Did anyone actually read this book? Or did everyone just buy it?
My favorite thing is when you explain SLOs to enterprise product managers and that they're going to stop working on features and work on reliability. That's pretty fun. Their heads explode. Yeah, that's nice.
So we're in this existential mode where we don't understand, who thinks what is supposed to be done and who's responsible for what layer. And are there only 3 layers? Is it software and platform and infrastructure, or can we shove some more in there? And no one actually understands what they're actually supposed to be doing, themselves. And in No Exit, one of the things that the characters discover is that there's no mirror in this room that they're trapped in with each other. They can't see themselves. They can't perceive themselves. So they have to rely on how others interact with them. They have to rely on how others see them so that they can define themselves. And this leads for some people to desire other people. It causes some people to feel that they must despise someone else. And this is when they figure out that hell is other people, right? People are making them miserable. And this is when they realize that they're actually there to torture each other. And the same is true for platforms. All these different things we try to define, they're putting you in hell. Because we can talk about SRE and DevOps and platform engineering and whatever other terms we want to apply to how people handle modern operations. Any other terms that we want to call our organizations or titles we want to give people. We end up in the same situation. But it's not just about desire and hatred. You become dependent because when you can't see yourself, when you are defining yourself against what the SRE book says or what Andrew's told you at conferences or what anyone who's been on stage here this entire week, if you depend on what those people are saying and use that to define yourself, then that's who you are. And now you're tied to that. Even if you kind of hate it. You require that for your continued existence. But it's not just fancy terms that are vague, that no one really understands. There's all sorts of things you have to do.
There's more vague terms.
Yeah. There's so many things that people constantly tell you at conferences just like this. You've got to do these things. You've got to have CI/CD so that you are deploying 10 times a day, and you got to have proper observability, do SLOs. I tell you to do them all the time. Maybe you don't have to. You got to do microservices, and you got to be resilient and perform chaos engineering, and it just goes on and on and on. And in this system too, you run into this problem where everything's dependent on other things for them to understand themselves.
But also, if you're going to do all those things, you probably need a platform.
And so Sartre has this concept of the others, right? Where we as humans are too blind to understand ourselves, and we let the definitions brought to us by other people This is how we end up defining ourselves. And the same is true for our platforms. The same is true for our approaches to running reliable services. And this causes us to depend on each other. We can't go it alone. If we can't understand exactly where we are, we look to others, right? We look to other systems, other platforms, other philosophies. Are you one of those people? Are you one of the others?
Are you one of us?
Are you one of those people who tells other people this is how you should be doing it? And it turns out that everyone wants to be the good one in their story, right? They want to be the ones who say, we're doing it correct. The way we're doing it is how it's supposed to be done. Our platform is good. It's correct.
Our silo is the best.
But the thing is, you can't be good without taking action. You need to have agency. You need to tear yourself away from just being defined by others, by other platforms, by other philosophies, by other books. You need to be able to take your own actions, make your own meaningful decisions. So there's a part in the play where the characters really finally understand this is not just a waiting room. This truly is hell. There's this bronze ornament on a mantle. And at first, the character of Garcin says, this is ugly, I hate this so much. And he tries to move it, because he doesn't want to look at it anymore. He wants to get it out of the way, because to him, this ornament is so ugly. But as time goes on, he realizes that he needs that ornament to exist, because his existence relies on that ornament being on that mantle, that unmovable ornament. It has to be there, because that's what he has. He doesn't have agency anymore. And this is a studied topic in many different ways, right? We end up becoming beholden to things that might actually be bad for us. Things like change aversion are proof of this. Traumatic bonding. I think I underwent that at Google. I should have quit several years before I did. But I was so traumatically bonded. Part of my essence was being a Googler, to the point it took me years longer to quit than I should have. These things are all real, and these are all things that we experience as operators of systems, because operating systems is not easy, and sometimes is traumatic.
So, you haven't yet got over your, what do you call it, sense of human dignity? So our experience and performance is a function of the system. Systems are going to system. They have a life of their own, right? So we're talking about operating systems, distributed systems, socio-technical systems.
I don't know if I even know what it means, but I really like talking about complex systems. Like, I mention them a lot.
Someone should probably administer them. And system administration is going to constantly evolve up the stack. So maybe the tasks that were attached to what was once called system administration is no longer this thing, or it's no longer the hotness. But the work of building, scaling these systems on systems, someone should probably take some responsibility, even though the tasks have changed. The tasks have evolved. The abstractions are higher. So someone somewhere must take actions to keep the system running. And software helps, and we can change the words, but there's always going to be ops. And anyone who says otherwise is in sales, marketing, or denial.
Or a conference speaker.
Or DevRel, which is marketing. This is fine. So don't attach your existential identity to your tasks.
So over the course of the play, the characters want to escape. They want to get out of hell. Like, there's this door, and especially Garcin, right? Like, his character, he's set on I need to get out of here. I need to get out of here. And there's a doorbell, right? The valet that led them all in said, just ring the doorbell whenever, and I'll come. Well, I'll provide whatever you need, right? And Garcin rings the doorbell several times during the play, and no one ever shows up. The doorbell doesn't actually work. He really wants to leave, but over and over and over again, no one actually answers. Because when you're in hell, there is no help. There's no one who's just going to show up and fix your problems. So finally, he decides to just try to open the door himself, and it swings wide open. Like the door wasn't locked at all. If he wanted to escape, to leave hell, he just could. But he can't bring himself to do it once the door is actually open. Because we're so dependent on each other, we're dependent on each other's definitions, our existence relies on other people's definitions of us.
So, can you administer systems that scale up and down, that always keep running, that never stop changing, all by yourself? Even if you're like the one serverless person, someone somewhere runs that platform. Someone's operating it somewhere.
It's systems all the way down, people.
So are you SRE? Are you DevOps? Are you a buzzword? Are you one of us?
It doesn't matter. But what is true is we can open that door. We can escape hell if we want, because the door is actually unlocked. But we have to be brave enough to step through the door. So let's step together.
Let's go. We jump off the stage. Let's go.
Ready?